In the face of tragedy and trauma, humans are capable of some pretty remarkable things. Take, for instance, Maria Countess von Maltzen, an aristocrat of fabulous wealth who lived in Germany during the 1940s. And if you know anything at all about history, you likely have a sense of where this story is going. A rebel spirit with an erect sense of justice, Maria defied the Nazis from the very start of their rise to power and was, quite fortunately, largely above suspicion because of her status. Over the years, Maria provided a safe haven for Jews, deserters, and forced laborers, cleverly helping them furnish false visas and even arranging escapes from Berlin in trucks, a made-for-movie feat that included Maria herself behind the wheel. In her words, "It was easy for me to resist Nazi authority because I had always resisted my mother's authority. I was a queen on the black market all during the war, but I had to be good at it because I had so many extra people to feed. I always said, no matter what came along, I prefer to be in a tough situation than go to bed with a bad conscience." The empathetic bravery that Maria possessed was not unique to her, though her story is pretty badass. This breed of fierce selflessness has swirled in the hearts of many compassionate souls across time and history, often resulting in tales we consider, frankly, heroic. Take, for instance, the tragic tale of the Milford Mine, the site of Minnesota's worst mining disaster. You see, the prosperous mine's property line was mere feet away from Foley Lake, a boggy body of water that would see to the mine's watery demise on February 5th, 1924. The first warning was an uncanny gust of warm wind, a force that blew out the gas lamps and toppled hats straight off the men's heads. Then came an even more foreboding omen, the treacherous sound of roaring liquid. As the lake crashed into the mine, men who were not trapped in the mud frantically clamored for the exit, a single vertical shaft to the surface. But as is so often the case when recounting such horror stories, there was one notable hero present. As veteran miner Clinton Harris processed the rapidly unfolding tragedy, he was faced with two options. You see, Harris was in the shaft, a position that would have allowed him to escape, so option one was to do just that: escape. The second option, one far more compassionate but far more grisly, was to warn the miners at the upper levels to flee. Choosing the latter, he tugged the cord of a nearby whistle, a self-sacrificing act that would be his last. He became entangled by the whistle's cord and drowned. Perhaps as a result of his compassionate decision, 7 men survived, though sadly, 41 drowned. From Maria's extraordinary advocacy to Clinton's otherworldly martyrdom, it's clear that compassion is a precious resource, and when humanity is at its best, it is not in short supply. But even the most empathetic, compassionate souls among us, a category that likely describes you as a listener of a podcast on the light and dark of the human mind, can flood our own inner minds, so to speak, when exposed to too much suffering. You see, there is a dark side to being wired with compassionate, empathetic tendencies. When we are overwhelmed by the amount or degree of suffering around us, we can quite literally fade. Hi, I'm Jessica Carson, and welcome to Patina, a podcast that examines the surprising beauty of all that is dark, shadowy, and seemingly tarnished about the human experience. Let's play. Compassion fade describes the decrease in empathetic behavior and emotion that can occur as the number of people in need increases. Said differently, there is not a linear relationship between the degree of empathy and the severity of a crisis. While we are generally quite happy to help a single person in need, whether that be through an accident, incident, or one-off hardship, we as humans get quite overwhelmed in the face of a crisis, especially as the victim toll climbs higher and higher. Rather forebodingly, the concept of compassion fade is said to have been introduced in 1947 through a comment by none other than Joseph Stalin. In his words, "The death of one man is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic." And herein lies a disconcerting degree of truth. We as humans are not really capable of valuing lives consistently. You see, we as humans need to take mental shortcuts to deal with the absolute sensory and information overload that is human existence. And one such shortcut is called the affect heuristic, which causes us to make our decisions based on our emotional attachments to a person, animal, place, or situation. So, while it's easy to feel empathy toward a single person or creature because we can easily wrap our minds around them, imagining their lives in full color with balloon-filled birthday parties and parents in rocking chairs and journal entries full of dreams, we have a much harder time dealing with abstract targets like crises with many victims. So think natural disasters, diseases, acts of terrorism, war-torn battlefields, and other cruel aspects of our collective histories. Because we have a harder time imagining and forming emotional attachments to abstract concepts, like a large group of people, we, quite bluntly, care less. I am the proud mother of a handicapped cow named Jude. Well, let me be a little bit more honest. I am one of Jude's proud sponsors. From the first moment I saw his precious little face on Instagram, with his cleft palate and tongue drooping sideways out of his mouth, I fell head over heels in love. But Jude has some problems. He was born on a farm and left for dead because of his many medical woes, but was rescued by a compassionate animal sanctuary that has healed him and given him the most joyful little life a cow could possibly ask for. And I'm not the only one in love with Jude. Because of his exorbitant medical fees, there have been tens of thousands of dollars dedicated through social media campaigns to Jude's care alone. all donated by tender-hearted animal freaks like myself. And herein lies an example of the affect heuristic in action. Because I can look at Jude's sweet little face on Instagram and watch videos of him frolicking with his goat and chicken and fellow cow friends on the farm, I have an emotional attachment to him. And accordingly, I am able and willing to allocate a portion of my compassionate urges toward ensuring his well-being. But as the very guilty carnivore that I am ever so aware of the cognitive and literal dissonance in this story. You see, when I hear the statistic that 39 million cattle and calves are killed for food each year in the US alone, I don't feel quite as much as when I open my Instagram and I learn that poor little Jude has yet another ear infection. When dealing with unfathomable statistics like 39 million cows, it is quite literally hard to compute. You can tell me the number has decreased to 29 million or increased to 49 million, and for better or worse, my emotions around the statistic aren't going to change very much. It's just too overwhelming. And because I quite literally cannot deal, I choose to save one very cute, very Instagrammable cow instead. Or take a video that many of us have seen and haven't been able to nudge out of our minds since. The viral clip of the sad, precious-looking turtle with a straw burrowed deep within its tiny little nasal passage. As we watched the straw being removed excruciatingly slowly from his nostril, with blood pouring out all around the scene, anyone with half a heart was turned inside out by the pain inflicted upon this poor, innocent creature. And so, this video, a video that featured one identifiable victim, poor Mr. Turtle, sparked a hugely successful campaign to ban plastic straws. Other campaigns that have made broader, less specific claims say that 6 out of 7 sea turtle species are classified as threatened or endangered due to human actions and lifestyles, have been far less successful. I suppose I can't worry about all the sea turtles, but maybe I can just worry about the straw turtle? Now, of course, this phenomenon can be witnessed outside of just animal welfare. We see it in the effectiveness of donation campaigns that focus on the plight of a child struggling with cancer, or a battered mother fighting to make ends meet, versus other, less successful campaigns to raise money for cancer or domestic abuse more broadly. We also see it in the power of personal testimonies and autobiographies. But as soon as we start having to pour our hearts and wallets out towards 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or more creatures, be them human or animal, we lose our oomph. We can't seem to make it matter in quite the same way. Our compassion just begins to fade. Fortunately or unfortunately, there is an evolutionary explanation for compassion fade. Research has found that we tend to tune out those intense examples of suffering at scale to avoid becoming emotionally overwhelmed. According to the mobilization minimization hypothesis, we attempt to minimize the negative impact of such events by fighting or fleeing, and compassion fade can be thought of as a form of emotional fleeing. We become apathetic, not because we're awful, but because when we hear about crises en masse, we have a limited capacity to feel sympathy. We also have a decreased willingness to help. When I was a little girl traveling to New York City, I remember seeing a homeless person for the first time. It was winter, and he was on the sidewalk with a piece of cardboard, cold and hungry and alone. My tender, innocent young heart ached for blocks and blocks before I finally asked my parents if we could turn around so I could put some change from my jacket into his cup. He was a human in need of help, and my small self could do something to lend a hand, even if it was just a few sticky dimes. But as a 30-something-year-old now living in Philadelphia, a city with an almost overwhelming homeless population, I hate to admit that when I see a homeless person today, I am not as eager to hand over my dimes. There are just too many to help, and it almost feels like fighting a losing war. And so instead, I spend those dimes on things like happy hour and overpriced salads. I'm not saying it's right, but it's a way of coping with a world filled with an impossible amount of suffering. I consider myself a kind and generous person, so why is it that I often choose, in a state of overwhelm, to ignore the suffering of others? As it turns out, it has a lot more to do with our inborn wiring than you might think. You see, compassion fade is particularly common among a class of us that you as a listener probably fit into: empaths. As a patina listener, there is a pretty good chance you are either a full or partial empath. As a flaming empath myself, here are a few quick self-assessment questions. Have you ever been called too emotional or overly sensitive? Do you tend to feel and take on the emotions of your friends, partners, colleagues, and family members? Are you easily drained by crowds and intense noises, smells, and chatter? Do you need a lot of time alone to recharge and like to have control over when you can potentially leave overwhelming situations? If you said, "Oh, hell yeah," to any of these statements, you are likely at least a partial empath. And being an empath, a topic we will cover much more deeply on a later episode, is an absolutely beautiful thing. We are excellent at recognizing and responding to others' emotions. We are much more likely to try new things if we see that another has enjoyed them. And we are, perhaps most importantly, more likely to want to help people who are struggling. There is a healer archetype alive and well within the empath spirit, with our tendency to feel others' emotions resulting in an almost compulsive desire to make them better. But I hope you realize there's a caveat coming. You see, there are shadows behind our compassion as empaths, one of which being we are more likely to experience compassion fade. Research has inconveniently identified empathy as one of the main causes of compassion fade. In a strange plot twist, our caring nature is actually what makes us most prone to this blunting of compassion. It seems that the more empathetic and open we are to others' pain, the more likely we are to share in their suffering, to burn out, and to become demoralized by, depleted by, or desensitized to suffering. While any empathetic person can experience compassion fade, it is most common among those in healing or savior-like professions, like doctors, counselors, psychologists, nurses, EMTs, firefighters, police officers, detectives, veterinarians, animal shelter workers, or other people responsible for making decisions in the wake of crises, like politicians. In a study of nurses, a group particularly prone to compassion fade, an increased sense of empathy was associated with a higher risk for compassion fade, resulting in the decision to leave the profession, a decline in performance, changes in health and personality, increased risk for errors while caring for patients, and negative impact on personal relationships. Those who suffer from compassion fade tend to experience symptoms like chronic exhaustion, isolation, apathy, feelings of blame or resentment towards the sufferer, irritability, headaches, trouble sleeping, and depersonalization. And so, in some ways, we can look at instances of compassion fade and pass judgment upon the empathetic souls it possesses. Or we can take a closer look at the wiring of those who are most prone to its effects. It is not an indication of our ability or willingness to feel too little, but instead an indication of our deep ability to empathize with others. It is our conscious or unconscious way of trying to avoid getting sucked too far down the rabbit hole. If you've ever guilt-tripped yourself, as I have done oh so many times, for your seeming unwillingness or inability to feel deep compassion in the wake of yet another disaster, I am here to tell you, you are not a monster. You are a deeply feeling human creature, cautiously attempting to be of the world without being subsumed by it. And in a way, perhaps this makes you wise. When we break the word compassion down to its roots, we see calm, meaning together, and passion, meaning suffering. Think Passion of the Christ. So, quite literally, the term passion means to suffer together. And we really do suffer together. Brain scans have shown that when we watch others in pain, our brains respond as if we are feeling that pain too. This mirroring is most likely an evolutionary adaptation that helps us predict, avoid, and respond to pain, but it can also lead us into dark places. It can turn us off from our true empathetic nature and make us seem, or actually be, cold and blunted and apathetic in the wake of tragedy. I wanted to cover this topic because I know that many of us, empath or not, are experiencing compassion fade as of late. Between COVID, social upheavals, natural disasters, war-torn countries, and hints of civil war creeping into our own, among many, many other local and global issues, there is just far too much suffering to be processed. My goal with this podcast today, as with every episode, is to offer you a little glimmer of hope as you face those dark crevices within yourself that seem bad or broken or at times maybe even a bit sociopathic. And so, here I go. Be kind, discerningly. Be generous, mindfully. Empathize with others, thoughtfully. Show compassion, with boundaries. And never, ever judge your empathetic nature for trying to protect you. That's all for today's episode of Patina, written and produced by me, Jessica Carson, with the help of my partner in crime, Jeffrey Sayers. With any luck, it's helped you to look into a shadowy aspect of your human experience with a bit more hope and a lot more curiosity. If you like Patina, I think you'll really enjoy our other offerings. From online courses, to books, to individual and group coaching and consulting, we warmly invite you as a seeker to dive deep with us into all that is beautiful about the shadows within yourself, your company, your relationships, and our society. So give us a follow and maybe even drop us a note on how we can play together. After all, the shadows are a lot more friendly when we play.